Hello and welcome to the second module of the slow speed manoeuvring series. This time it's specifically for drivers. The title is Slow Speed Manoeuvring Specifics. Without further ado, let's crack on. Now the DNA slide. Knowing your slow speed manoeuvring specifics takes commitment, so this module best resonates with the value committed. And the aims and objectives, what we're going to cover today. Firstly, we're going to look at what to consider before driving. Then we'll move on to what to consider before reversing, before looking at reversing and parking in a bit more detail, before finally closing on some final guidance on parking in car parks. Okay, so on to before driving, and the first step of this is a health check, making sure you are fit to drive. So before getting in a vehicle and driving, it's your responsibility as a driver to complete a self-health check and to ensure you are fit to drive. Vision is an obvious example of this. Eyesight should be tested regularly, and any corrective vision aids should always be worn whilst driving if required. The second example is overall health, which can include feeling ill or drowsy from prescription medicines. And remember that any health condition likely to have an impact on your driving must be reported to the DVLA. Fatigue or lapses of concentration is the third example. Remaining concentrated can go a long way to help avoid a collision, and turning the audio equipment down or asking for assistance from co-occupants can help with this. The fourth point is tiredness, and another big factor in the cause of slow speed manoeuvring incidents. So where possible, avoid driving between the hours of midnight to 6 AM, because this is where alertness is lowest. And if you're too tired to continue driving, stop the vehicle in a safe place. So, for example, not on the hard shoulder is a great example of that. And remember to include breaks in your planned journey at 15 minutes every 120 minutes of driving to reduce fatigue building up, so that when you're doing a slow speed manoeuvre, you won't be tired or fatigued and likely to make a mistake. Okay, so now that you have checked that you're in a healthy state to drive, you must now prepare and check your vehicle before driving. This is important to identify and rectify any defects that may be present, in addition to providing the optimal setup for you as a driver. As a minimum, a daily walk-around check should be completed and should cover having clean mirrors, correctly adjusted mirrors to minimize blind spots while reversing, for example. All windows should be clear and clean of debris or smearing. Windscreen wipers should activate, and screen wash should be present in the vehicle, which should be checked to be operational prior to driving. Make sure the lights and indicators are working, clean, and can be seen for other drivers. Tyres should be checked for tread depth, any obvious defects in the tyre wall, and inflated to the correct pressure. Walk around your vehicle in the morning and observe for obstacles, pedestrians, and accident damage, and also note which direction the front tyres are facing to avoid an immediate incident upon setting off. If you're in wintry weather, ensure that frost, snow, and ice have been removed from all parts of the vehicle prior to driving. And if the vehicle is shared, make sure to correctly adjust the seat, headrest, and steering wheel for yourself. And finally, ensure you're familiar with the size of your vehicle and any key features of note. Okay, so vehicle specification. Do you have the right vehicle for the job? Now that the vehicle is checked, the last thing to note is to ask yourself the question, am I in the right vehicle for the job? There's another few questions you can ask, and they are, is this vehicle suitable for me and my driving experience? Have I received appropriate training in the proper use of this vehicle? Do I know how to use any fitted driver aids safely? If any of the questions you answered or asked yourself are no, then do not drive and contact your manager or supervisor accordingly. We encourage you to get out and look when required. So when a tricky manoeuvre is about to be attempted, for example. The purpose of this is to identify blind spots on your vehicle, and remember to check these when appropriate whilst reversing. All it involves is a walk around the vehicle looking for the blind spots, obvious hazards, and any obstacles to avoid. Okay, that's it from me from the time being, so I'll hand over to Colin, who will talk through the section on before reversing.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So before we even decide to reverse, there's a couple of key tasks that we need to be doing. First and foremost, we need to ask ourselves the question, can we actually avoid reversing if at all possible? We know the vehicles sustain damage through the manoeuvring exercises, particularly with reversing. So it would be good if we can actually avoid the reversing maneuver altogether. But also plan your maneuver before performing it and take your time when completing the maneuver as well. Sometimes it helps, like Matt said, to get out and look. If you do a 360 of the vehicle, it'll probably take about 20 seconds, and that could be the difference between reversing into a post or a post box and not actually doing that maneuver. So attempt to simplify the maneuver as much as possible. Also choose an appropriate place to conduct the maneuver as well. If you need to turn your vehicle around, wait until you find a safe place. Try not to reverse or turn around in a busy road. Always try and find a quiet side road, if at all possible, round the back of the road that you're reversing into. Maybe you can turn it round there with obviously much more ease than reversing in and out of the road, and never reverse from a side road into a main road, as the highway code confirms that. And then always check your mirrors before you start to slow down. Make your intentions clear by signalling, but also remember to cancel all signals after use, otherwise they could be misleading to other road users. So simple techniques that we can use before we even start to reverse. But to sum that slide up, try and minimize the scope of reversing in the first place. So we'll have a quick chat on reversing and parking sensors, talk about the safe and proper use and how they operate. We know that reversing, or some people call them parking sensors, have the ability to detect objects. So whether they are static objects like junctions and buildings, or hazards such as vulnerable road users and other vehicles as well. So they will detect these objects behind the vehicle, and they will normally alert us to the nearby hazard through sounding a beep. So it's an audible in-cab device. However, the sensors on the cameras rely on us moving the vehicle very slow. So we can't really rely on the cameras if we're going at a speed that doesn't suit manoeuvring speed, which is about 5-10 miles an hour maximum. So we need to make sure that we always drive slowly, smoothly and carefully in a controlled manner. Otherwise, the sensors will not be able to help us anyway. But I think the most important thing about this is be aware of the limitations of the equipment. For example, some sensors don't always detect narrow parking posts or fence. Sometimes they don't detect hazards like skips in the side of the road as well. So the system may also not accurately detect objects close to the side of the vehicle or even moving objects. So if we're going to be using reversing sensors and cameras, we need to make sure that they're clean, checked for the functionality, and they're actually in the correct operation before starting the maneuver. So the key takeaway from this is reversing sensors and cameras are designed to work at slow speeds only, but never rely on them. So despite the sensors now being commonplace in many of our vehicles, they will not always prevent slow speed maneuvering collisions. So they're used as an aid to assist the maneuver, but never rely on them at all.
Okay, so now I'll talk through the section on reversing and parking in a bit more detail. And we start with reversing. So maintain concentration and object awareness whilst reversing. The key concept whilst reversing to understand is to understand what's around you at all times by observing your surroundings. So you should always be aware, especially when pedestrians are likely to be around, and in particular those with limited mobility or those groups that may include children. Make sure to check your mirrors before stopping and signal to alert other drivers. Reverse slowly at all times, keep to a maximum of 5-10 miles per hour, and don't forget about the front of your vehicle whilst reversing either. Remember that if reversing can be avoided, avoid it. For example, if you can follow a through road rather than reversing, follow the road around instead. It's much safer. It's important to understand the limitations of reversing sensors. So as Colin said, they'll struggle to identify narrow objects such as lampposts, and in challenging weather they're less accurate, and remember the lens has got to be clean as well. Don't forget to reverse slowly whilst using these as well, and as Colin said, never reverse into a main road from a side road. It's better to take a longer route than to perform this dangerous manoeuvre. If using a driveway, remember it's best practice to reverse in and drive out. as it's much safer to reverse into a quiet drive than out onto a road. Now the tip in red in the top right hand corner of the screen is an indication to a dynamic risk assessment, which allows you to get into a focused headspace before reversing and make life easy for yourself. Turn the radio off and open the windows to become more effective at observation. And a final tip for HGV and van drivers: try and reverse to the right where possible to utilise your driver's side mirror to minimise the presence of blind spots. Okay, and parking, goal, get out and look. So get out and look, or goal, is our little acronym. We expect you to get out and look prior to attempting a tricky manoeuvre. Do not attempt a manoeuvre you're uncertain about alone without getting out. It will help you better visualise the manoeuvre and judge whether the manoeuvre is appropriate. So if you have to reverse out of a parking space, remember to be extra vigilant of vehicles and pedestrians behind you. Look out for cars waiting to get your parking spot. Look out for others who may be backing out at the same time. And look out for reckless drivers who speed across car parks or lanes. So this is why it's much better to reverse into the spot than to reverse out, because you avoid all of these extra perils. So when parking, we advise you to, again, reverse slowly. Always check your mirrors. Look over your shoulder frequently. Be observant, know what's around your vehicle at all time. Obey traffic lanes, local road rules and instructions, so follow the highway code. Signal to alert other drivers. Watch for other vehicles cutting diagonally across car parks and don't follow their example. And if you're in a car park, be aware of pedestrians, but especially children and persons with limited mobility. And remember the saying, goal, get out and look. Okay, and now just some final tips on parking. Remember to obey the traffic lanes and one-way systems in particular. Follow signage and their instructions. Watch for cars cutting diagonally across car parks. Signal to alert other drivers. If possible, find car parks which give you and other drivers an appropriate amount of space. And remember to take your time whilst parking to maintain full control of the vehicle at all times. Okay, I'll hand over to Colin, who will finish this module with some summary on car parks.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So we'll discuss some more guidance and top tips for parking in car parks. We know that a lot of vehicles sustain damage in car parks. So it's really important to be aware of obviously the size of your vehicle, the size of the parking spaces or bays, and also the attitude, skills and knowledge of the different people that could be using that car park as well. Everybody in that car park will have a different objective to achieve for that day. Some people will be rushing, others will be just doing the weekly shop, and there'll be people like us who are pulling in maybe to service equipment within the supermarket or even buy lunch. So there's lots of different people in there. So we need to consider, firstly, how are we going to get out of this parking space before we even park into it? And if possible, like I said earlier, try and minimize any reversing, full stop. So if you can drive through one space into another, that will allow you to pull away forwards when you return to your vehicle. The other benefits of this as well is better for fuel consumption. So if you're trying to reverse out of a parking space on a cold engine and you're prevented from moving off because there's vehicles going past, that's going to eat into your fuel bill. But also, if you need to make a quick getaway and leave that car park a little bit quicker than you normally would, say for example someone was threatening you, if your vehicle is facing forwards, it enables you to drive off without any problems whatsoever. So always think about how am I going to exit this car park, minimize reversing and try and always drive in ready to drive out. Also be aware of nearby objects such as parking posts and lampposts as well. Remember that reversing cameras will not always pick up these hazards, so we need to take effective observation. We've mentioned about opening the window slightly. That will enable you to tune in to the outside of the vehicle, so we're actively looking and listening for hazards in and around the parking area. Also, if you're parking at night, always try to park in the well-lit and densely populated areas. Again, using that technique of trying to always make sure that you can drive off rather than reverse off. Again, if someone was threatening you, you're going to be able to drive off a little bit quicker there as well. Avoid parking in spaces reserved for the disabled. Obviously, that's a given, and also for parents with children as well. But also, before leaving the vehicle, always set your handbrake on and leave the vehicle in gear or park position if you're in an automatic. Okay, so on the theme of avoiding damage whilst parked, we really need to be thinking about choosing our neighbour when we're parking in, say, for example, a supermarket car park. So if we park next to a vehicle which is already damaged, there's every possibility that the driver of that vehicle might damage yours as they reverse out of their parking bay. So choose your neighbour wisely. But also note that if you're going to park up next to, say, for example, a two-door car and there's a child seat in that two-door car, there's every possibility that if you park too close, as the parent opens the door, they're going to hit your car and dent it as well, because two-door car doors are much bigger than four-door car doors. So try to park away from the supermarket entrances, unless of course it's at night time. If it's at night time, we'd actively encourage you to park a little bit closer because we get more footfall, obviously the CCTV there. But on a normal daytime scenario, park away from the supermarket entrances. It's always good to park a little bit away as well. So then if you are feeling fatigued, you can actually walk in to the supermarket as well and get the blood pumping, a little bit of fresh air, but also closer to the entrances. There's a higher volume of traffic and pedestrians, vulnerable road users. So be very careful about where you're going to pick your place. And then avoid areas where other vehicles will frequently maneuver, such as narrow spaces, maybe disabled bays, and also avoid parking on the very end of a row as well, because very often that's where vehicles sustain damage. As a vehicle turns left or right past your vehicle, the back end of that could clip your vehicle, and then you could return and you're going to have a dent in the back of your vehicle as well. And then last but not least, avoid parking near the shopping trolley return areas. As you can see in this photograph here, we've got the silver Peugeot right next door to the shopping trolley return. So there's every possibility that a shopping trolley being pushed either by an employee or a customer could actually make its way towards your vehicle as well. So very, very important to try and keep away from the trolley park returns also.
Okay, and that's the end of module 2. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.